I've campaigned for independence all of my life. If there was an easy or shortcut route, I would have taken it by now.
Going ahead, there are two obvious possible outcomes. Outcome one, Boris Johnson either gets his deal through or brings us out without a deal at some point. I understand about the
Well,
Ben
I'm not
Act,
sure
at some point.
I don't think those are the only two options.
Well, let's say option one is what he would regard, and that part of the world would regard, as a proper Brexit. We leave the EU. England, certainly, in its economy, diverges in terms of regulations and in taxes. The SNP running Scotland would be in a very difficult position for a few years at least, where you would be part of Brexit Britain. How would you cope with that?
Well, firstly, and I don't want to overly labour this point, but I don't think the two options you've described are the only two options. The reason I am so determined to do everything I can to stop Brexit is because I think what you've just described there is damaging not just for Scotland but for the rest of the UK.
Isn't it strange that a woman who claims that she's fought for independence all her life and claims that there is no shortcut to independence, and yet the mandate that they obtained in 2016 specifically states that circumstantial changes such as being quote-unquote dragged out of Europe against our will is strangely superseded with the desire to prevent the UK leaving the EU. But yet the aforementioned mandate essentially relies on the UK leaving the EU. Whether it be Brexit or some sellout variation, whether that's Theresa May's withdrawal agreement or Boris Johnson's 2.0 potentially, any form of Brexit or lack of would be the shortcut that Helmet Head claims there has never been in relation to independence.
To answer that question, well, I think Scotland, in these circumstances, the argument for Scotland becoming independent is even stronger than it has been previously, so that we can decide our own relationship with the European Union. I would want us to be members of the European Union, continue to be in the single market and the customs union, and actually have a better foundation to build economic success than we would have coming out of the EU. And we see today a poll in the Sunday Times shows that support for independence is rising, and people actually think that option, an independent Scotland in the EU, would lead to us being more prosperous than the alternative.
Absolutely. I mean, to act as if the UK leaving the EU strengthens the case for independence, it's really rather disingenuous, as that is your case. That was always the case that was put forth in the mandate from 2016. One relies on the other. But separating the two justifies the relentless attempts to stop Brexit without appearing contradictory in nature. And this, I believe, is exactly why the media never call out the SNP, nor do any other politicians for that matter. They seem to get away with running their mouths and coming across as completely and utterly anti-democratic and contradictory. And as for the EU, don't you kid yourself, this is all about the EU and nothing really to do with so-called independence. It's really not.
A lot of your own supporters don't understand is because under this process a Conservative government could refuse to allow you to run a referendum. Why don't you go for the so-called Plan B and say that if we win a big majority at the next election, or we will carry out our own informal referendum, that will be enough? What's the problem with it?
Because the process we undertake to choose our own future has to be capable of delivering independence. Now, I've campaigned for independence all my life. If I thought there was a quicker way, an easier way, a Plan B that would get us there quicker, I would have taken it by now.
What the fuck, man? She's just after saying she wouldn't support any potential deal, using the excuse that she's opposed to Brexit. And here we have the exact same quote, near enough word for word, from a clip that I played at the beginning. About no shortcuts to independence, apparently, and she'd know because she's been campaigning for independence all her life. Am I supposed to congratulate you for that? Are we supposed to congratulate you for that? Pat you in the back. Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, or any Boris Johnson 2.0 equivalent, or better yet, any form of Brexit at all, would be enough to constitute itself as a so-called shortcut.
What we have to do is have a process that firstly allows us to demonstrate there is majority support in Scotland for independence, and secondly we have to have a process that is legal and accepted. Otherwise our independence will not be recognised, not just domestically in the UK, but across. Well, Catalonia and our friends in Catalonia do demonstrate that you can have a referendum but not necessarily become independent. I'm in the business of...
And look at the left-wing independence party in Catalonia. Look at the state of it.
Seeing Scotland become independent. Now,
It
would be easy.
Independence. This is where there seems to be a misconception with a lot of people. She keeps selling this picture of a future of independence, exploiting the term independence. In all seriousness, she's fucking lying. There is no independence within the European Union. It's all fine and dandy for just now, if you want to believe that. But if you choose to deviate away from the status quo, what the EU Commission proposes, then you're in a bit of trouble. And of course, Helmethead will be happy to oblige with anything that the EU throws her way, as she's already said herself that we would live up to the responsibilities, as well as reap the so-called benefits. Live up to the responsibilities as well, and I wonder what that might be. Fucking liar.
Easy for me, and it would make my life easier in the short term, just to tell my supporters what they want to hear. But I've watched Brexiteer leaders doing that over the past 3 years, and it doesn't end well. I have to deal in reality. I'm determined to lead my country to independence, and that means doing it properly.
You've talked a lot about an election. Now, in that election, looking at the polls, it's very, very hard to tell what's going to happen. But one very, very plausible scenario is that Labour is the largest party but doesn't have an overall majority and has to look to other parties in order to be able to govern. Now, are you still in a position where you would not go to any kind of coalition with Labour? So you do a supply and support. You might do a supply and support arrangement.
We will not put the Tories into office. I don't favour coalitions. I'll say the same as I said in 2015 and 2017. We would favour a progressive type alliance. But I say this to Jeremy Corbyn or any Westminster leader who's looking to the SNP for support. If you don't accept Scotland's right to choose our own future at a time of our own choosing, don't even bother picking up the phone to me.
And again, as I keep stating, they only have jurisdiction to call upon a referendum for independence if the criteria within their mandate was met. And the criteria within their mandate specifies circumstantial change, such as being taken out of Europe against our quote-unquote will. And yet, here we are again, with a blatant, deliberate attempt to separate the two and make it sound as if we have a right to determine our future. It's up to us when we decide. And as much as the contradictions are painstakingly obvious every time this thin-lipped globalist fuck opens her mouth, and I think the only way that they're allowed to run their mouths and spin this complete and utter bullshit diatribe on a regular basis is because they're being scapegoated as front and centre stage in stopping Brexit. They all get to take a back seat and allow the SNP and Scotland to be scapegoated for their fucking treachery. Peace.